maybe a spouse, maybe the children. And sometimes that violence, that anger can turn quite physical. It can't be that way with you as Christians. You can't have that happen in your household. And to be aware that it may be going on not in your household, but in someone else's, a relative's, a friend's, or a neighbor's. There's also an increase of blaming one another during these times. You're the one who said we should buy this house so we could afford it. You're the one who took that different job. You're the one who retired 2 years ago. You're the one who never saved money. You're the one who always spends. Whatever kind of blaming goes on, to avoid blaming one another. It's really hard to put a finger on one or two people for the problems of the world, right? Really can't blame anyone. And I doubt any of you is here to blame for the whole thing of what's going on in the world. Don't blame one another during difficult times. There's an increase in anger, in selfishness, and greed. Be careful so you don't find yourself being selfish and greedy. Sometimes our mentality is, you know what, I'm going to take something that I may have a right to. I'm going to take it and keep it for myself. I'll hoard it for a while, even though I don't need it right now, because maybe someday I will, 2 days from now or 2 years from now. And to be careful to strike a good balance in your life between saving for the future, which is good, and hoarding, which is not okay. Be careful that you don't find yourself being greedy and selfish, especially to the exclusion of being able to help others. There's an increase during difficult financial times in vices, in alcohol and drug use, gambling. All those things increase as well. Some ways of trying to forget about the stress or deal with the stress and forget about the problems that some families find themselves in. There's an increase in crime. Don't be a part of those things either. We can't do that as Christians. There's an increase in depression and suicide during these times as well. Again, sometimes we find most of our self-worth in our job or what we have or do not have. And when that's taken away from us, maybe even through no fault of our own, depression sets in and sometimes thoughts turn to suicide. Can't be that way with you. Don't give in to despair. Don't give in to any kinds of depression. And be aware that others may be experiencing that around you. Those are some of the things to look for, to make sure those things are not part of your household, but to be aware that they might be in your relative's household or the household of your neighbors or of your friends. To be careful, to be alert and aware of those things going on. In Romans chapter 8, verse 28, St. Paul tells us that all things work together for the good of those who love God. And that's quite a bold statement on the part of St. Paul. All things work together for good. Another way of saying that is that God can bring good out of any kind of situation whatsoever. God is the master of turning situations around. Ultimately, he brings good out of death, right? As he brings eternal life and life in heaven with him out of death. God's the master at bringing good out of any kind of situation whatsoever. And so if we have faith in what St. Paul tells us, maybe we have faith as well that God can bring some good things out of difficult financial times. Maybe these are some of the things to think about, how God can bring some good out of this for you in your life. One is to understand where your heart is and where your treasure is. Jesus tells us that where your treasure is, your heart is as well. Where is your treasure in all this? Where is your heart? If your treasure was completely in finances and things and maybe a job or whatever it might have been, then your heart's going to be broken. But if your treasure wasn't just that, or wasn't primarily things and money and investments, that wasn't your primary treasure, then your heart's a little less broken during these times. Maybe still sad, of course, but your heart's not as broken because you have your spouse, you have your children, you have your family, you have the essential things in life. So this is a time to look at where is your treasure, where is your heart? Are there some things in your life that you just do not need? Some things that you may want, but are not essential for you to live and to survive. And this is a great time, maybe forced upon us in many ways, to decide which bills do I need to pay and which ones don't I. Which things don't I need? What things do I absolutely have to have in my home? But what things don't I need? What things have I survived without before? What things can I survive without for the next year or two until things turn around? A good time for you to examine that, not separately, unilaterally, but with your spouse, okay? So not just one of you is making that decision, but to talk those things through with your family. A second way, I think, of bringing something good out of the whole situation for each of us is that as Americans, we sometimes put a lot of trust in government and financial structures. And we put a lot of trust in them, and we find a lot of security in those things. We find a lot of security in our stock market, in our IRAs, in our pensions, and things like that too. It's a great way of breathing easier and sleeping better at night. There's no doubt about it. It's good. We should have some things stored away for the future. However, I think this teaches us that we can't put too much security, or we have put too much security, too much trust in government and structures to be there till the end. Ultimately, things pass away. God is with us always. That's the ultimate source of strength and security in the end, the way that it just has to be. He's the one who brings stability and security and safety to our lives, no matter what else happens in our life. Another thing I think that God brings from this too is looking at mutual concern for one another. This might be a time in which you're going to see more of your family, because you may not be able to afford to go out, you may not be able to afford to go your separate ways. You may be reacquainted with your family a little more during these days. Maybe adult children will move back in with you. You'll be thrust back into reacquaintance, not really maybe wanting it, but forced to do so. Or maybe the parents may be forced to move in with their adult children. Whatever the case may be, you may be reacquainting yourself a little bit more with your family. And I hope that's a good thing, right? I know that can bring its own stresses as well, but I hope it's a good thing to tighten and unify the bonds of a family. Families come together in difficult moments, and they can become stronger during difficult times as well. Then maybe finally, to understand during these times that God can bring about the good of your generosity to others. It's not just about, am I okay? Am I going to survive these times and these months? Certainly, I take all the measures I can to survive these days, but I can't stop there when I say, okay, it's going to be okay for me, and that's enough. It's going to be okay for me, that's fine, that's the first step maybe, but that's not enough. Is it going to be okay for you? Is it going to be okay for my neighbor? How can I help? How can I still be a generous person, maybe in creative ways? How can I be a generous person during these times? Because I can't stop being generous. I can't fall into greed and selfishness during these times. And that's a great good that can come for all this. If you can be generous in the most difficult of times, you can be generous in the best of times as well. There's a lot of good that God can bring from this situation, a lot of ways that we can follow the gospel of cleansing our minds and our hearts from undue attachment to things, to money, to some of the security that they bring. The church is with us at all times. Certainly we had a prayer service here on President's Day precisely because of difficult economic times. Church is thinking about you, thinking about me, concerned about your welfare and the welfare of your families and friends. You are in our prayers at all times, especially, though, during these difficult financial times. Know that this is an opportunity for us to follow the gospel message, for us to detach ourselves from the things of this world and to attach ourselves more closely to God and to our faith.